This is Amend and Progress, your go-to podcast from Vodori for all things promotional material review. Get ready for actionable insights, valuable perspectives, and best practices to elevate your workflow and team morale.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Amend and Progress, Vodori's podcast about the material review process. I'm your host, Annalise, and today we're going to be talking about the who, what, when, where, and why of promotional review meetings. Joining me in the conversation today is Senior Manager of Customer Success at Vodori, Lauren Walker. Lauren, welcome back to the show. Delighted to have you back on.
I'm excited to be back. Thanks so much for having me.
Yay, thanks for being here. So you're such a expert in this particular topic that I knew when we wanted to talk review meetings, you are the one to tap. So again, just appreciate your time today. Let's do some getting to know you questions. How does that sound?
Sounds great.
Okay. What is your morning beverage of choice?
I actually have it right next to me. It is a hot latte. I've gotten very into latte making. We got ourselves an espresso machine at the beginning of COVID when we started having to, work from home all the time. And it's now become an obsession of mine.
I love it. Well, I mean, you basically have a coffee shop in your home, which is incredible. You're actually the second person to say that they had gotten an espresso machine recently. I forget who else it was, but this seems to be a trend that people are like, why go out when I can just do it at home and have as many as I want without any judgment?
Exactly.
What is your current or favorite hobby?
My current hobby, I recently got back into reading. I was a big reader when I was a kid, and I got back into it in the last couple of years. So I'd say that's probably my biggest hobby right now.
I love it. I mean, it's one of those things you can fall in and out of, but it's really fun to be in it, and you're like consuming books all the time. So that's awesome. Okay, one more like businessy one. What is one productivity hack or best practice you use in your daily life?
Yeah, one of the things I like to start my day off with is just like writing down the top things that I know I need to get done. And that might be like on a Monday, it's going to be the daily things, but also the things I need to do by weekend. Because physically crossing something off of a list is very helpful for me.
I'm laughing only because the last Vodorian I talked to was also a to-do list person. There seems to be, Vodori loves our to-do list, which is awesome. I think we're just, got to know what you got to tackle that day. And certainly for someone like you who has a constant influx of things to do, I imagine that's super helpful. Okay. Thanks for entertaining those getting to know you questions. Just fun to start with something a little more fun to respond to. But we're going to be talking review meetings today. So much to cover here. And I think I want to talk about when, why, like I said at the top of the episode, all of the elements here, but define it for me. When I came to you and was like, I want to do an episode about promotional review meetings, can you just define promotional review meetings, maybe for those that are embarking on this for the first time or to have less exposure?
Yeah, absolutely. So a promotional review meeting is going to be something that our customers utilize to get together and physically review content or comments, produce discussion, and ultimately decisions on some of the discussion ongoing about a piece in a meeting format. And that can take the form of many different types of meetings, cadence of meetings, but that's ultimately what its goal is to review that content or commentary to come up with an outcome or a decision on that piece and the discussion happening on that piece.
Okay. And I think based on, we had done some surveying in last year's Vodori's benchmarks report, and it's about 50-50 for our customers. Half of our customers do review meetings, half don't. And I think, talk me through what are the conditions? So you talked about how the really intent is to achieve a decision or move forward on a piece of content. Is this a weekly meeting? What are the conditions under which we see our customers holding these promotional review meetings?
Yeah, it does vary a little bit. Those of our customers that come to us and have had previous meetings or before using Vodori have used promotional review meetings typically have a cadence that they like and are used to. And oftentimes we see that fall in line with the expected turnaround time of content. So that might mean weekly if they're expected to review pieces within a week so that every piece has the opportunity to be in that review meeting. And it might be more ad hoc in nature. It might be when it's only the diciest content or the most controversial commentary, or they really need to get something done. And that could happen more than weekly or less than weekly. It really depends on the type of content they're trying to review.
Hmm. So it could be weekly, could be more ad hoc, could be both, right? Like maybe you have a standing one, but there's something that's super urgent or a special case that you maybe need to bring that team together. Who owns it typically in our experience? Like who is responsible for the promotional review team, like preparing for it, doing all of the things associated with it?
Yeah, typically it's the person responsible for the process. So responsible for PRC or at least held accountable for it. And usually we see that fall to a coordinator type role. And that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different customers, but ultimately the person coordinating the intake, the flow through the review process, and the wrap up of pieces as they go through their PRC review. Most often pharmaceutical companies tend to have this role, like it's a standard role that they have, whereas some of our med device and diagnostics companies maybe don't, and therefore it falls to the process owner if they choose to have these meetings.
Okay. And maybe for those so if someone's doing this for the first time, let's say, how do you prepare for a promotional review meeting? What do we advise our customers on in terms of like, these are the things or the activities that should happen prior to the actual review meeting?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's like any meeting, right? You want to set yourself up for success. Some of the best practices that we provide our customers are before you even have a meeting, establishing expectations. So ensuring all participants who are going to be included in that meeting understand the expectations for both prep, so coming into the meeting with stuff prepared if that's necessary, and how they get involved in the meeting itself. It's important to send an agenda in advance so you know exactly what pieces are going to be reviewed if that's how you choose to run your meeting. It's not going to be every single piece that goes through your process. Oftentimes, it's going to be those priority pieces or the pieces with the most feedback. So sending that agenda in advance so your reviewers or your participants know exactly what they're going to be expected to talk about. Defining those roles and responsibilities or expectations for the meeting. Do they need to leave their annotations and commentary before heading into that meeting so that they've actually reviewed the piece and it's ultimately discussion about that feedback? Have somebody who's running the meeting. So decide who's going to be running and in charge of that meeting, that coordinator role that I kind of mentioned earlier. And then a cadence for the meeting, if it's going to be a consistent meeting or an ad hoc meeting. So really setting yourself up for success like you would any other meeting, understanding who's going to be at it, what the roles and responsibilities are, and what you're going to be reviewing in that meeting.
Anything in terms of, and I imagine this is highly variable between customers, but like the number of pieces we see typically tackled in these types of meetings, is it 3? Like, I imagine if you have too much, you're not going to be able to get through it all. So, I mean, maybe it's too variable to know, but is there sort of like a sweet spot in terms of like the number of pieces of content you can really discuss in these review meeting contexts?
It all boils down to like the type of content you're reviewing. If you're reviewing a one-pager, that could go a lot faster than reviewing a bulky deck of some sort. So it ultimately depends. So I don't have a great answer for that question because content can vary so greatly in terms of how big it is or how much you're having to review and produce feedback on.
It depends is a completely valid answer. So, and to your point around agenda, good to send that out in advance so that if it is a very complex piece, people know about that going in. It's sort of like a different mentality you almost would need to put on to be like, okay, this is going to be like more detailed, more nuanced. This is sort of the mentality I need to be in. So just like another value add of having that agenda sent in advance.
Absolutely.
Anything else about like the actual, so those were some really good like preparatory best practices. What about in meeting best practices? Anything that you've seen work really well? Anything for folks to just like consider as they either embark on it for the first time or iterate on their existing review meeting?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a great way to set yourself up for success in the actual meeting is by having the pieces prepared and pulled up in Vodori. And so having them open, having those, commentary or annotations open that you need to make discussions on, and then actually annotating on the piece when a decision is reached so that everyone agrees it's not only talked about in the meeting, but it's a form of notes or outcome in the actual meeting as well. So working through all of the pieces that you've agreed to review, capturing those decisions in those annotations and replying it so it's logged on that audit of that piece and you're all agreeing at that time and it's logged that way.
Mm-hmm. So almost like, yeah, like you mentioned, you're using the software for the note taking itself, and then you have that record. It's very clear. People can go look at what happened. So that makes total sense. So is that typically how decisions are made? Is you're just like voting as a group and that gets reflected within the system? Or is there any like other type of voting that happens typically?
Voting, I would say maybe. It's more about responding to the annotations and making a decision, and then the group could ultimately vote after. So if it's a group of reviewers, regulatory, legal, and medical, and they come to this meeting and you all made some decisions and the PRC coordinator is logging those decisions in the annotations, they may reconvene afterwards and actually go through and vote because of the discussion had.
Sure.
Or they can vote in real time, but oftentimes it could be a distraction if they're trying to do something while making decisions versus just focusing on the discussion at hand.
Yeah, that makes total sense. What if they can't reach a decision? Is that something you pick up in a future meeting? Like what happens if either the discussion took too long or you ran out of time or you just literally couldn't achieve consensus? Pick it up next time? Or what do you advise our customers in terms of if they're not able to make that decision in the review meeting?
Yeah, I would say maybe sit on it for a little bit and pick it up either in the next meeting or go back and look at it and remind themselves what they were even talking about. Ultimately, their internal SOP should really define who's ultimately responsible and accountable for the types of decisions or feedback that exist on a piece. And so if it's in one of those very clear-cut swim lanes, it's going to be up to that reviewer or that person who's in charge of that type of review, for example. Yeah. But yes, I would say take a step away, come back, look at it with fresh eyes with anything in the decision-making world, and either bring it back to the next review meeting because obviously it's either so questionable or unagreed upon that it shouldn't be approved yet and they need to take some more time on it, or look back at that SOP and say, whose decision is this at the end of the day?
Mm-hmm. Great insertion of the SOPs and that role that they can play in helping to facilitate the meeting itself. So I think that's a great plug. Anything in a special consideration for the remote teams? Or is this like consider general remote team best practices? Or is, anything in particular you would share about the PRC committees or the PRCs that are meeting remotely?
I don't know if there's anything specific that I would do differently because I think meeting best practices kind of apply to both in-person and remote. Is like, if you're not all remote, make sure you're using your meeting facilitation tool to the best of its ability. Maybe get on camera. Facial expressions mean a lot of things. You're dealing with people at the end of the day, so it matters.
Yep.
Body language matters.
Mm-hmm.
But aside from that, I think running and preparing for the meeting is very much the same in a remote world as it is in person.
Yeah, and for many, it's common. It's just like how this goes now, right?
Yeah.
You and I are recording this remotely. Like it's just how we work together today. So I was just curious if there was any nuance or specificity, but it sounds like bring your remote meeting best practices to the table in this context and you'll see success there.
Absolutely.
Okay. So you've talked about, I want to talk a little bit about how like material review software fits in. So you've talked about in terms of preparation, like dropping comments, questions, using that as sort of the pre-work arena. Yep. Pulling up the document in the meeting, annotating, making decisions, having that audit trail captured. Any other ways or, how else does the software fit into the review meeting apart from those two ways?
Yeah, we touched a little bit on the types of review meetings that people have and whether it's like a set agenda of pieces, but sometimes it's just a recurring cadence of meetings and maybe it's not necessarily a set agenda of pieces, but rather what's highest priority at that time. Mm-hmm. And so utilizing, in our case, the jobs board that shows the priority of pieces to go through the top priority, the ones that are needed most immediately and review those pieces in the available time that you have for the meeting. But I think all other things that you already described and what we've talked about is prep is key. Looking at something with fresh eyes in a meeting and initially reacting, not going to set you up for success for making a decision out of that meeting. It's really important to have reviewed the piece minimally as a participant in that meeting before getting there. Yeah. And then ultimately recording decisions so that you all agreed in that meeting and you can remember that you agreed to it a week later when you look at it again.
Such power in everyone being on the same page going into that meeting in terms of we've all looked at the same thing. The comments are dropped. Like, I think it's just, for me, that's one of the biggest best practice takeaways is just use the prep time accordingly, because I think it can only benefit the review meeting and the decisions you're able to make, the collaboration that happens during that meeting. So I think that's a really important just like call out or emphasis on the prep piece. Okay, so I've sort of indicated like, well, someone doing this for the first time, what should they consider? But if someone came to you, they've never done review meetings ever, what would be like one piece of advice that you would want to leave them with, or like one best practice you would want them to take away?
I think the most important thing is expectation setting. And I think that's true, not even just for a review meeting, but for generally anything you kind of approach for the first time, is set expectations appropriately. How much content you're going to review, what types of content you're going to review, and who's going to be involved and what their roles and responsibilities are. And you'll set yourself up for success better that way. Expectations are so, so important to getting the outcome you want out of those meetings.
I love it. I think that's a perfect piece of advice for anyone, honestly, no matter if you are doing this for the first time or you're doing it consistently. Like, I think that's just such an important like core tenet of success for these review meetings. Well, Lauren, perfect way to end the conversation today. Thank you so much for just sharing your perspective. I think like just based on how much people engage in this type of review meeting, it just felt like a great way to share some best practices and things for folks to consider as they iterate on their own review process. So thanks so much for being here today.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
And everyone, the conversation doesn't end here. Please follow Vodori on LinkedIn for updates on new episodes, ask us questions. We would love to hear your feedback on all of the Amend and Progress episodes to date. You can subscribe to Amend and Progress on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're enjoying the episode and the content, please rate and review so other folks can discover Amend and Progress. Until next time, this is Annalise. Have a fantastic day.